Well, good morning. Today we're going to read chapter 12. I have two pictures here besides the cover of the book. One of them is of a magnolia. I believe that's the state flower of Mississippi. And the other one here is the legal balance, the scales, sometimes symbolic of law and order, that kind of thing. Um, and I picked this because Hiram gets a subpoena. It's a strange looking word, but a subpoena is basically a summons to um, go to court. Um, he feels he has some information about RC, and that's why he's been called to court. So let's get started. And here's chapter 12. Most of the day I fretted about what to do. Had R.C. heard that I'd talked to the sheriff? Was he looking for me? If he was, would he come at night, catch me in the backyard when I wasn't expecting him? Would he pull me into an alley when I was downtown? Would he be hiding out near one of my fishing holes waiting to ambush me? Or would he be crazy and cocky enough just to walk up to the front door and knock? When we were kids, I figured RC was plain mean, but after what happened to Emmett, I knew RC was worse than mean. For the first time in my life, I worried about dying. Not just the death part, but the messy and painful things that would lead up to the dying. The kinds of things that would make a guy welcome death. I wanted to forget the sheriff's orders, pack my things, and jump on the next train out of Greenwood. Early that evening, while Grandpa was dozing in his chair and I was flipping through old magazines trying to keep my mind off the trial, torture, death, and R.C. Rydell, a loud knock on the front door just about pushed my heart right through my chest. I didn't move. Grandpa's snoring paused a moment, but he didn't wake up. The pounding again. "Grandpa," I whispered, "somebody's at the door." He was dead asleep. More pounding. RC? My mind raced to figure out what to do. Grandpa's pickup sat in the driveway, so it was obvious we were home. I could wake Grandpa, but he'd be no good against RC, and if he got in the way, RC would probably hurt him too. I couldn't sneak out the back, but that I could sneak out the back, but that'd mean leaving Grandpa alone. Believe me, I'm no hero, but right then I realized that as long as I was in Greenwood, RC could get me if he wanted to, and I'd have to face up to him sooner or later. I took another look at Grandpa, asleep. "I'll get it," I said, even though he couldn't hear me. It was still summer, but my hand felt ice cold as I gripped the knob to open the door. It was like opening my own coffin. I took a deep breath, turned the handle, and braced myself for a fist smashing into my front teeth. Where I had expected to see R.C. Rydell ready to rip my head off stood a uniformed deputy. He had a clipboard and some papers in his hand. "You Hiram Hilburn?" Slumping against the doorway, I tipped my head back and let out a sigh. "Look at here, boy," the deputy snapped. "You Hiram Hilburn or not?" I stepped through the front door and pulled it closed behind me. "Yes, sir." My voice shook a little. "Consider yourself served, son." He handed me a sealed envelope, and then held out his clipboard. "Sign here, and that lets the judge know you received this subpoena to appear in court." "Court? Don't tell me Sheriff Smith never said nothing to you about the trial they're fixing to have up in Sumner? You know about that color boy got himself kidnapped and killed?" "He asked me to stay in Greenwood, but he didn't say anything about a trial." The deputy handed me a pencil and tapped the clipboard. "Not my problem, son. Signing this only means I handed you the subpoena. Whether or not you end up testifying in court is up to the judge and the lawyers. But I suppose maybe because you're a juvenile, you won't even have to testify if you don't want to. But I'm just delivering this." He paused, looking at the clipboard. and if you'll sign it, I can get back to work." I signed the form, and he left. Grandpa was awake when I came back into the house. "Naomi again?" "No, sir. It was a deputy. He brought me this." I handed the envelope to Grandpa. He opened it and read the subpoena. When he finished, he didn't say anything for a while. Finally, he said, "I don't like this, son, not one bit. It's one thing for you to talk to George Smith about what R.C.'s done and said, but testifying in court, you're just a boy, and this business is too dirty for you to be getting mixed up in. Do I have a choice?" "Of course you have a choice. Last time I checked, we're still living in the United States of America, regardless of what the NAACP and those outside agitators say. If I was you, Hiram, I'd keep my mouth shut up about this whole thing. It's going to be ugly, maybe even dangerous. Northern rabble rousers will be there, and some of our local rednecks aren't going to take too kindly to that. And didn't you say that R.C. had threatened you?" "Not exactly threatened, but I sure felt warned. He doesn't want me talking to Sheriff Smith about what he did to Emmett while we were fishing. That boy's dangerous. You ought to stay low, keep quiet, and let things work themselves out. No need for you to risk getting hurt. The judge can make you appear in court, but you don't have to tell everything you know, especially when testifying might put you in serious danger." I nodded. "R.C. scared me for sure, but shouldn't I tell all the truth, even if I was afraid?" "Now, what about this R.C. Rydell?" Grandpa asked. "You want me to talk to the sheriff about his threatening you? You got a right to feel safe here, anywhere, and the law's bound to protect you. If you're worried that he's going to come after you, I can ask the sheriff to have him locked up if they find him, or maybe have a deputy keep an eye on the house while you're here. You know that boy, Hiram. You know he can be real trouble." "I guess I wouldn't mind if a deputy kind of hung around here for a while, just in case. I hoped I'd never see R.C. again, but if he really wanted to get me, having a deputy around wasn't going to stop him. If you talk in court, Hiram, you're going to stir up R.C. pretty good. There's no way you can keep it secret. Trials are public, and whatever gets said is going to show up in the Commonwealth. So even if old R.C. has enough sense to steer clear of Sumner Courthouse, he's going to hear that you spoke against him in court." Thinking about R.C. made me shiver. I know I'd be crazy to tell everything at that trial. R.C. scares me to death. If I had my choice, I'd be on a train tonight headed back to Tempe. But Emmett Till is dead, Grandpa, for no good reason. He had as much right to be here in LaFleur County as I do. He was just a kid like me. Hold on, son. He was a colored boy who didn't know his place. That doesn't give R.C. and those two other men the right to murder him. Grandpa's face turned serious. "You don't know for sure who did the killing, Hiram. And you've got to remember that Chicago boy made his own trouble. If he'd stayed in his place, he'd be alive today. And believe me, son, I truly wish none of this had happened." Grandpa looked exhausted. "Not a single bit of it. But it did happen, and that boy is dead, and we both know that R.C. Rydell had something to do with it. Sure, he scares me, but don't I owe Emmett something? Isn't it my duty to do something about it?" "You don't owe that boy a damn thing. For starters, he's dead. All the talking in the world isn't going to change that. And you're in the Delta, son. No jury down here would even dream of punishing white boys for putting a Negro in his place. Sure, they got carried away something awful, but they're local men. White men. The only thing you'll be doing by speaking up at that trial is to get yourself hurt. Maybe hurt bad." Grandpa sounded so wrong-headed, I couldn't believe it. Maybe some of what Dad was always spouting about equality and the American dream had rubbed off on me. Don't American laws apply in the Delta? What R.C. and those two men did was wrong, Grandpa. It makes me sick just to think about it. Because you're a decent young man. You come from good stock, Hiram. If I'm so decent, shouldn't I tell what I know about RC? He killed a boy, Grandpa, and I could have stopped him. Now, Hiram, you already did more than you had to calling the sheriff and everything. Not many boys your age would have had the courage to. But I should have done more. Maybe I could have stopped RC that night, made him stay here. Maybe if I had followed him. Grandpa waved his hand impatiently. You're forgetting that 2 grown men are already in jail for the crime, and they've admitted to kidnapping the boy. They would have done what they did whether or not RC was here. And you don't know for sure that he was here, Hiram. Or that he was there, Hiram. But he told me he was going to money with a couple of men and that they were going to teach a northern Negro a lesson. Emmett disappeared that next night. Just because he planned to go up there doesn't mean he ever did. Look at what you're saying, son. You already convicted RC for a crime you can't even be sure he committed. How are you going to look in court? Are you willing to accuse a boy everybody knows is a big talker of kidnapping and murder based on a conversation you had with him one night? Grandpa, I know RC and what he can do. I've seen what he's done before. So what? Do you have proof that he went to Mose Wright's house that night? That he was with Bryant and Milam? That he helped them kill that boy? You got any proof of that? But he said, don't matter what he said, Hiram. The court's interested in what he did, in what can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Excuse me. Do you really think that the jury made up of white Delta men is going to take your word over that of a local boy? Like I said, if you tell everything in that trial, the only thing you're going to do is get yourself hurt and embarrass me. Embarrass you? People around here have long memories, son. They remember how your daddy was, how I couldn't talk or whip any sense into him when he got to be your age. You have no idea how humiliating it is when a boy shames his family. Friends and neighbors said they understood, that they felt sorry about how Harlan and I battled, but I know that behind my back they talked about how I was a poor father, and that if I had raised Harlan right, he wouldn't have shamed me. His voice trailed off. Your daddy, you can't be like your daddy. Grandpa sat quietly until Ruth Ann called us to supper. He looked up, a little confused, like he'd been dreaming or something, and waved me over to help him get out of his chair. You get in court and talk against white folks, Hiram, and people around here'll see your daddy and you. Contrary, that's what he was. Didn't like the South, the Southern ways. The Delta wasn't good enough for him. He wiped his mouth and his hand trembled. I don't think I could take it again. The public condemnation, friends gossiping, feeling shame because of what my boy did and said. I raised you different, Hiram. You are not like your father. You're a Delta boy through and through. Grandpa patted my arm. You're a good boy, son, and I've been proud of you. I know you'll do the right thing. Neither one of us said much more during supper. Grandpa seemed worn out, tired, and like his mind was on something else, and I just didn't feel like talking. Ruth Ann made one of my favorite dinners, but it didn't taste very good that night. Thinking about RC, Emmett, Dad, and Grandpa and the trial pretty much ruined me for eating. I managed a drumstick and a couple of scoops of mashed potatoes and coleslaw and then excused myself. I needed to get out of the house. I needed to see Naomi. Grandpa said nothing when I left the table and headed for the kitchen. You feeling all right, Mr. Hiram? Asked Ruth Ann when I came in. Not like you to leave my fried chicken and fixins uneaten like that. I shrugged. Just been worrying about this trial. You let the judge and lawyers worry about that, and I bet they're plenty worried themselves. I never thought I'd see it happen, but they got 2 white men sitting in jail right now, and they're going to send him to trial. As far as I know, it's the first time in the history of Mississippi that white men are going to be made to account for what they've done to a black man. Ruth Ann's eyes filled with tears. Nothing any jury can do to bring Emmett back, but they sure can let folks in the Delta know that things are changing at last. I'm really sorry about Emmett, Ruth Ann. Awful sorry. I don't know why, but I felt like crying. I blinked the tears back. I wish it never had happened. I It should have never happened. I appreciate that, Mr. Hiram, she said as she dabbed her eyes. Ain't nothing you could have done about it. I know, but I do appreciate your sympathies. But maybe I could have done something. Maybe I can now. What's done is done. You couldn't have stopped old Milam and Bryant anyway. The law and the good Lord'll take care of those two and anyone mixed up in their wickedness. Somehow I felt mixed up in their wickedness, mixed up and not knowing how to get out of it. Ruth Ann took a deep breath, ready to change the subject. You heading outside? Thought I'd take a walk. I need to get out of the house for a while. She pointed to the kitchen garbage pail next to the back door. Why don't you take that with you to the garbage on your way out? And Mr. Hiram, Ruth Ann said, smiling, don't you be too late talking with that Naomi girl. You know how her daddy gets. I never said anything about Naomi. Don't I just me, Hiram Hilburn. I got boys of my own back home. Now get this trash and yourself out of the house before that poor girl starts worrying about what happened to you. It felt good to be outside. A few stars had edged over the dark, tree-lined horizon. A light breeze stirred the humid night air, and already the steady drone of frogs and crickets was the only sound as I emptied the trash into the garbage can behind the garage and walked along the driveway to the sidewalk in front of the house. As I walked along through the shadows of the trees that lined the sidewalk, I felt like I was leaving the worries about RC and the trial behind. It didn't take long to get to the bridge, and I felt better than I had all day when I saw Naomi leaning over the bridge railing, looking down into the dark water of the Yazoo. Her hair swayed in the night breeze, hiding her face. She didn't move when I stood alongside her and leaned over the railing myself. What are you looking at? My arm rested next to Naomi's, barely touching. The color of the river. During the day it looks so yellow-green, but as soon as it's dark you'd never know it had a speck of color in it. Where's all that color go, I wonder? Without talking, we watched the dark currents of the Yazoo swirl under the bridge below us. Finally, Naomi turned and faced me. Hey, Hiram. Hey, Naomi. You been here long? A while. Tonight wasn't a good night to be home. Pa's on a tear again. She turned around and leaned against the railing. No bruises, at least none I could see. That meant she had gotten out in time. Whoops. Sorry about that. What did I do? Close it. Chapter 12. I guess we'll have to find it again. Talk about losing your place. That meant she'd gotten out in time. Drinking? Always that, but the last couple of days the sheriff's come by looking for RC, and Pa don't know where he is. Sheriff thinks Pa's lying and warned him that RC's a fugitive, and that if Pa's hiding him, he'll land himself in jail. Soon as the sheriff leaves, Pa cusses him, RC, the NAACP, President Eisenhower, and anybody else he's mad at. Then he starts up drinking again and slows down for a while, and that's when I know I gotta get out of there. What's the sheriff want RC for? I asked. Says he just wants to ask him some questions about the Negro boy that got killed up in Money. He say why? The way RC talks, I suppose everybody knows he hates Negroes and how he treats them. He's been in trouble with the law plenty of times before, but this time it galls Pa something awful. He rants and raves. Never thought I'd live to see the day when a white lawman would bother a white citizen in the state of Mississippi about this kind of trouble. RC ain't no saint, not by a long shot, but my boy's white, and the law's got no business worrying him about some black boy that floated up in the Tallahatchie. It makes him hateful, Hiram. Worse than drinking. You seen RC lately? Not since Sunday. I don't know where he is, and I'm worried. I'm sure he knows the sheriff is after him. Ain't the first time he's disappeared for a while. Do you think he had anything to do with that trouble and money? RC's done a lot of stupid things, but he's my brother, Hiram. I don't think he'd murder somebody. She looked at me, a little unsure of herself. I guess they're planning on having a big trial up in Sumner, I said. Naomi nodded. Sheriff wants me to be ready to testify. I got a subpoena today. Testify? For what? How could you know anything about the murder? You don't even know anybody in money. I know RC. So what? Lots of people know RC. Why do they want you? I told her what RC had said the night before the kidnapping. Next day, Emmett Till was missing, and so was RC. Naomi's face turned sad. You think RC was with those men? I don't know. The day RC and I went fishing, we met Emmett Till and some of his friends at the river. RC did something terrible to him. Did he hurt him? No, but he scared and shamed him. I don't know, Naomi. If you'd seen how RC acted at the river, how cold-blooded he was, and then he told me he was going to money. You can't talk about this in court, Hiram. Naomi's eyes opened wide. You can't say another thing about this. I know he's your brother, and it'll be bad for him if anything. Blast my brother, it'll be bad for you. Do you think RC or any of his Peckerwood friends will let you get away with speaking against white men for doing something to a Negro? And even if you get back to Arizona, do you know what they'll do to your grandpa? You can't talk in court, Hiram. You just can't. If anything happened to you, if RC did something to you, her voice shook. I just couldn't stand it. She grabbed my hand and squeezed it hard. You have to stay away from this trial, Hiram Helburn. I don't care if you have to sneak out of town and I never see you again, but you stay away from that trial. You stay away, you hear? And then she leaned into me and started to cry. I held her while she buried her face against my chest, and I wanted to stay with her like that for as long as I could. Holding her made me forget about everything else that had gone wrong in Mississippi that summer. Right then, the only thing I wanted to remember about my weeks in Greenwood was standing alone with Naomi Wydell on the Yazoo Bridge, thinking not about Emmett or RC or Grandpa or Dad, but about Naomi and how I wanted to protect her. Now we're really done.